over the wire a half hour before the Fight Night picks. Full card video dropped before Kattar versus Allen. This fight dropped. Then ultimately we get the LFA flyweight champ Carlos Mota coming in on incredibly short notice to take on one Cody Durden. And for Durden, it was somewhat a short notice regardless because Durden was supposed to be taking on Clayton Rodriguez. We were getting ready for that fight. Rodriguez is out, and originally it was supposed to be Rodriguez versus Vinicius Salvador. So scrap all of those plans. You get to reset. Durden was out there on Twitter. He was pining for a fight against Charles Johnson, somebody that Carlos Mota knows very well.
Exactly.
The only unfortunate part about it is Charles Johnson already has a fight booked next month against Zhalgas Zhumagulov. So ultimately we get a little bit of a clash of styles, but ultimately a really fun pairing. And there's going to be a lot of people out there on Twitter, the hipsters among us, that are going to be very, very excited about this matchup. Flyweight needs new talent. The last time I checked, there were 18 unranked flyweights. The division has grown and swollen tremendously over the last couple of years, but Carlos Mota, definitely a welcome addition to this division. And if you haven't checked out any of his tape study, this guy is an absolute firecracker. Like, he loves to stand, he loves to bang. And with his boxing style, I wrote it down on my notes, I wrote, his boxing opens up his kicks to all three levels. Only really throws kicks to two levels, and they're not the lower two. He throws head kicks, he throws a lot of kicks to the body, whether it's just a straight roundhouse to the body or a teep, but he doesn't kick the leg very much. It's kind of different.
He doesn't, and that is awkward, because normally we talk about fighters in kind of a reverse sense. It's, hey, Dan Henderson didn't throw any kicks, but even he could throw an inside leg kick, right? It's not that hard for you to get your leg to hit somebody's thigh. That's not an unreasonable thing to ask somebody. But when you go to the body and to the head, normally that does require a higher level skill set. So it is kind of unique that Mota is able to go to sort of the higher extremities, if you will, but he's not really a big leg kicker. Now, I will say this about Cody Durden, since he's much more, he's the more well-known commodity in this fight, I should say. Cody Durden has shown us a lot of promise in each area of his MMA game, and I think that's fair to say. Is he a bad boxer? Not at all. I think he has decent power on the hands. He's a little bit basic with his stand-up attack.
But his right hand is where his bread gets buttered, and he's got a lot of power on that overhand right when he gets full extension.
And there's something to be said, too, for a guy who knows what he does well on the feet. It does feel like everything Durden tries to do sets up either his offensive wrestling or that big overhand right, and it is really nice to see him just have synergy with his game plan, because there's a lot of fighters out there, even high-level fighters, we talk about, hey, their striking's really good, their jiu-jitsu might be really good, but they might lack that sort of transitional period with their wrestling to be able to decide, okay, I can decide where the fight's going to take place, whether on the feet or on the mat. Durden definitely has that wrestling in his back pocket, but he doesn't always show it to us. I guess there's longer fights he normally does, but sometimes he can get a little hand happy, and that's why I do worry about Durden in this matchup against Mota. Mota, if you go back into the film study, like you mentioned, can not only throw kicks with his combinations, but is extremely heavy-handed, and I do worry a little bit, because we've seen this before. I'm not necessarily saying, oh, Cody Durden has now fallen in love with his hands, but how many times have we seen a good wrestler in the UFC suffer some losses, get some wins, get a big knockout, and then all of a sudden they try to fight in a different manner? I don't think that's what we're going to get out of Durden, but I just feel like since it's something we have seen in the past, it is worth bringing up, because if he goes out there and tries to just throw hammers with a guy like Mota, that definitely gives Mota a good chance to win this fight.
I doubt he does that, and the reason being, you look at Durden his last time out, he's taking on JP Bays, and poor old JP gets finished in that matchup. That was 3 fights in a row, and combined, Bays get dropped 8 times in those 3 fights. Numbers. So for Durden, a great win. He doesn't get a bonus out of the finish, but if you do look at it for Durden, 2-2-1 in the UFC. He was an underdog in the draw and the 2 losses. He was a slight favorite in both of the fights that he won in. But we flip it on over to the new fighter in this matchup, Carlos Mota. And if you do look at it, I mean, a very, very interesting level of competition. It's gotten steadily better. He was supposed to compete at LFA 100 against Victor Altamirano for that flyweight title. Unfortunately, due to visa issues, I read an article with Cage Side Press back in 2021. He was unable to make that fight. And if you look at it for Mota, he took 2020 off just with the pandemic and everything, kind of rounding out his skill set. But going down and looking at a lot of his fights, I mean, he did have the fight at LFA 112. He's a minus 1,000 favorite. That was a catchweight at 139 pounds. Looked really good against Jefferson Oliveira. That was a fight. They threw those 2 guys in there. Scratch your opponent on 1 day's notice. You make weight. Here's the fight. Have fun. So he ends up winning that one by decision. He looked really good in that. In some of his other fights, lesser levels of competition. His fight against Charles Johnson, Like, we talked a lot about Charles
yeah.
Johnson last weekend due to the fact that he fought Makayev. He lost in that fight, but
No shame.
I think really highly of Charles Johnson, and by extension, I think very highly of Carlos Mota. For the first 4 rounds of that fight, non-stop action. If LFA had a fight of the night, that was 100%. The fight of the night. It was the main event. It was for their flyweight title. Mota doesn't come out on the winning end. He loses in the 5th round. Just accumulation of damage. He kind of turns away. The shots were too much. He gets dropped, and that's the end of the fight. But he does storm back. Now, his second to last fight was at featherweight. It was, and I want to make sure that I get this one right. It was with a little-known organization called North Iowa Fights, and he wins their title at featherweight. Comes out his last time out back in August. Takes on Rizvan Abuyev, who had fought a really good level of competition. Fought Tyson Nam in the past. Asked to try and over with Fight Nights Global, and in that fight, Mota looked amazing. He hits him with like a short shot and then a hook and drops him. And for Mota, we talk about this guy, like they're going to call him, they called him actually in LFA, a jiu-jitsu boxer. He's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt. He catches a lot of kicks and throws guys, Charles Johnson and other previous opponents included. His top game's pretty good, but he doesn't like to play on top. But his boxing is where his bread gets buttered. And when we're talking about shots, you talk about guys that mix in their volume with their power. Mota does that, but he can kind of rely on his power a little bit to close the distance because he's not a really big, rangy guy at flyweight. But what I do like, he'll throw the right hand to try and land with some power and then follow it up on the half beat with a jab, and it really catches a lot of his opponents guessing. Same as when he goes to the body and then they bring their hands down like Abuyev did, and then he caught him with that hook.
I feel like we're both largely on the same page then. I was really impressed with the film study that I went back and did about Carlos Mota, and I'm really excited to see him in the flyweight division. Now, I will say this, on short notice, and I do understand this is short notice for Durden as well, this is a tough fight because, like I said, Durden has been able to display really high-level skills in the UFC. Now, have they all come in the same fights? No, but I always bring it back to what we said about Gilbert Burns for the longest time. A good striker, a good wrestler, great at jiu-jitsu. It would just be really nice to see him put all of those together to finally become that well-rounded mixed martial artist. With Durden, I do think there is the foundation there that is quite strong to where every time out there, I think, hey, we could see a big improvement from Durden. And if he is able to shore up some of those holes in his game, I think it is one of those, like, boom, automatically, you've kind of become a contender overnight, because I do like his wrestling, I do like his stand-up, and especially the power he's been able to demonstrate. I just worry that in this fight, if he's not able to get it to the mat consistently, and that's the thing about Mota, too, that I think we should bring up. Good at boxing, has good power, not a guy that I worry about fading in the first round, especially for the flyweight division. Has good cardio, can definitely fight late, and I think that's why this is such a well-matched fight, because normally you see a guy make their UFC debut against a more well-known fighter, no matter what the record is, and they are a massive underdog from the jump street. I know we're going to talk about the odds here in a second, but Mota was not given that treatment whatsoever from the odds makers, and I'm just happy to see that most people have given him the respect that I think he deserves.
Watching Cody Durden fight kind of reminded me, and I just so happen to have them, of Ruffles Flamin' Hot barbecue chips. Why are you buying Flamin' Hot barbecue chips? You don't know what you're getting. You're always excited about it. It's going to burn your mouth, and it's either going to be fun or it's not. And that's pretty much a Cody Durden fight. There's a lot of standing and banging. He kind of fights a little bit like a zombie. I had that one on my notes. Yep. You look at it as the fight goes on. He can expend a lot of energy early. A short notice fight against Chris Gutierrez, the draw. 10-8 first round. Round 2, round 3 didn't have as much success. His fight against Aruchi Long, as the fight went on, Aruchi Long had more success in that third round when Durden kind of struggled with the takedowns. But for Durden, 4.24 takedowns average per 15 minutes in his 4 fights at flyweight in the UFC. Number. That is a good number for sure. But you look at this fight, Matt, and the odds suggest, I mean, you had Mota opening a plus 125 favorite. There's only one site that has odds. This came out a half hour before our full card video came out on Monday. He's a minus 185 right now. Durden opened at a minus 145. He's a plus 160. We threw it out there to you on Instagram, Matt, so it's not a surprise, but on our Instagram page at Fight Night Picks, we threw it out there in that story. 59% going with Mota, 41% going with Durden. So the odds have Mota, even though he opened as the underdog, but take that with a grain of salt because there was only one site. Who knows at this point? And it's been a very short amount of time since this one was announced. So Durden's the underdog. The fans don't have him, but overall, most people see this as a fairly close fight.
I think Durden's going to look really good in that first round. I do expect him to use his wrestling quite a bit, especially in those opening 5 minutes, but I'm very curious to see. Let's say he does get the takedown, because I think Durden's a good enough wrestler and a good enough top fighter to where I don't worry about him immediately getting submitted if he takes down a guy like Carlos Mota. Not that Mota can't do work off his back, but you know what I mean. Durden's not some random random wrestler who can't have top control. So I like Durden in those opening 5 minutes, but I guess this is the question I wanted to ask you, and it's a bit of a cop-out. Carlos Mota is only 27 years of age. He is still quite young in his career, and I do think he can get better every time we see him. I feel like Mota, once he gets to the age of Cody Durden, like in 4 more years, that's going to look like a really, really nice product once he is finished. But I still worry, to bring it to a business that was in our city growing up, I don't know if it still exists, he's like Clay Cafe. You've made your thing made out of clay, and now he's in the oven. You're waiting for it to finish, you're waiting for it to harden up.
They're still doing it.
They are still doing it. I just feel like with Mota, the first time out might look really good, but I feel like he's the type of fighter who is going to have a couple fights in the UFC for us to really realize what his full potential is. I love the skill set that he has been able to demonstrate up until this point, but I do worry about his wrestling a little bit. Maybe that's mainly because of this matchup, because we know how strong Durden can be on the mat, but I think this is a phenomenally well-matched fight for it only being on 1 week's notice.
So what's the pick here?
I thought we were going to Tapology votes before we went to the pick. Sorry.
We went to the faithful voters on Instagram, Matt. 59% Carlos Mota.
So I've been a little split on this during the week. I worked today. I did my research while I was at work. I really liked what I saw out of Mota. But I do keep on going back to the fact that Durden, I think, is the steadier wrestler. Now, if this fight does go later, I could see Mota starting to open up with his striking and have a lot of success, but we have seen Durden expend a lot of energy early and fight in a safe enough manner in that third round to avoid the finish. And you hate saying, I like a guy by decision, but I'm worried about those last 5 minutes, but I hope you know where I'm coming from. I like Durden with the wrestling early on in this fight. If the fight does go late, it might get hairy. I can openly admit that right now, but ever so slightly, I am favoring Cody Durden in this matchup. But again, I can't say this enough. I think it's a really fun fight to be made on only, 5 days notice?
Think about who Cody Durden was getting ready for in this matchup. He was getting ready for Cledson Rodriguez, a striker, a kickboxer who had fought CJ Vergara, and the game plan's out.
I was excited for that fight, honestly.
When Vergara got the takedowns, he excelled. When Rodriguez was standing, he excelled. In this matchup, more of the same. Now, Rodriguez is going to throw more kicks. Mota is going to throw more of the boxing combinations. He's a way more active striker. Carlos Mota, I have in this fight. And I do worry about the fact that now you have to uproot yourself. You have to go back over from Brazil. You're going to the States. You're taking on Cody Durden. For Mota, obviously, he is the LFA flyweight champ, and that definitely stands to reason that he deserves a shot. People have been talking about Carlos Mota for a very long time, since he started going from Shuto over to LFA and so on and so forth. North Iowa fights even. The featherweight champ. But for me, I absolutely love the fact that Mota will throw hands. He will mix it up body to head, and I think that's one of those things that, as Durden is the wrestler, I do like Mota somewhat with his defensive wrestling. We haven't necessarily seen it tested. We did see it in the fight against Oliveira, and he just had quick hips, shucked them down, and then he was able to get on top and have his own success. So Durden is definitely cut from a different cloth. This is a guy that fought boxing, kickboxing, and MMA all in one night. So he is a little bit different that way, but I like Mota in the matchup. You get Durden.
Just the last point I want to bring up, because this is a very long video for this fight. I feel like this is a difficult UFC, not debut, I guess, because Mota's been in there, but this is a tough fight for Mota against Cody Durden on short notice. Again, like I brought up, Durden is a well-rounded fighter. You might not see the peaks out of some of his individual skill sets that you will out of other fighters, but I do think he is a difficult fighter to face on very short notice. But again, can't say this enough. I'm actually really excited for this matchup.
Ran hot and heavy on the short notice fight in Durden versus Mota, and if you have a look at this card, this now makes 10, count them, 10 fights on the card. If anything falls out, if anything is added, we have you covered here at Fight Night Picks, the big time main event. Calvin Kattar taking on Arnold Allen. Make sure you check out that full card video. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.